What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Back again with another chess video from Tata Still. This time, round 10. We are looking at the game Anish Giri versus Radoslaw Wojtaszek. So Anish had the white pieces here. Wojtaszek, Polish Grandmaster, had the black pieces. First, I want to give a shout out to the Occult Me, who picked our anonymous player that I keep up there to your right. The female player last week was Dorsha Derek Shani, Iranian chess player. So as you can see up there, there's another one. If you're the first one to tell me who that is, let me know in the comments below, and I'll give you a shout out in the next video. And also, you can ask if you want to see a particular game or subject matter covered in a future video, and I'll be glad to do that for you as a thanks for your participation. So of course, as usual, please subscribe and like and do all of that stuff to help these videos become more visible in the YouTube algorithm. So we're going to get right into this game without further delay. Game started off d4 from Anish. Wojtaszek played knight f6, bishop f4. So we have the London system making its appearance. Also know that Giri also won a fantastic game in the last round, round 9. So he's on the roll here. So d5 from Wojtaszek, e3, c5, knight f3, knight c6, knight bd2, bishop g4, c3. So we have a London system. There's no London system related to the Kali system, Tory attack. They're all cousins. And white is not going for any big advantage. Okay, the game is equal from this point. But basically, what Giri is looking for is a nice solid position, right? Perhaps create a few imbalances, all right, and test the waters, and then play chess from there, right? See which player can make the strongest and most consistent moves going forward, all right? Because this position like this is dead equal, but it's going to be a matter of endurance and persistence and consistency. e6, queen b3, right? Little prodding move there. What is black going to do about the b pawn? Okay, queen c8. So black defends it without creating any weakness. h3, right? Can I have the bishop here? No. Bishop h5, bishop e2, bishop e7, castle, castle. So both sides getting what they want out of the opening. Queen d1, right? The queen is not really doing nothing on queen b3, on b3 at this point. So Giri simply comes back and backs up the bishop on e2 there. Knight d7. So now black has an idea of pushing f6 and playing e5. Good plan. Rook e1. Again, there's really not much to do in this type of position. Okay, like for instance, rook c1 could have been played, right? Why not rook c1 right away? At least being directly opposed to the queen on c8, right? But rook e1 is played, right? Doesn't hurt, but it doesn't do much either, right? Wojtaszek plays queen d8. All right, now option there is to play a move like queen b6, right? It's just an idea. That's why I put the highlights there, right? Because there's really not much to it, except that you could say, all right, it keeps pieces off g5, but and maybe the queen will develop itself to b6 to connect the rooks at some point. That's a decent idea. However, to me, more useful than that at this point, it just seems a move like bishop g6, taking over the diagonal. Notice that white cannot play bishop e2. And at least at this point, you can establish a superior minor piece in the position, right? That bishop on g6 would clearly stand out as the better minor piece there, right? And then also you don't have to worry about knight h4 because the bishop is on e7. Instead, queen d8 was played in the game. Giri played d takes c5, knight takes c5, b4. Knight d7, a3, knight b6, rook c1, And you have these ideas, of course, of C4 at some point. C4, E4 are common breaks. I like to think sometimes of the London system and systems like the Kali system, Tory attack, of course, which are related. They're almost like playing the Slav with the tempo ahead. Think of it like that. And you're looking for the same breaks, either E4 or C4 in this instance. If you were playing the Slav as black, your breaks would be C5 and E5. Now, it's very difficult to get an E5 break in as black. So usually you'll see most of the breaks occurring on the queen side with the C5. But with white, it's a different story. Since you have an extra move, oftentimes you're able to make the break on E4. And that's the preferable break if you can get it in, E4, E5, of course. F6 for Wojtaszek. There's E4. And now E5. Giri drops back, bishop E3, bishop F7. And now Giri makes an important decision, right? He creates some imbalances in the position, or more imbalances in the position rather, and he gives up his bishop pair by playing bishop takes B6. Wojtaszek plays A takes B6, opening the lane for the rook. Now, if queen takes B6, E takes D5, bishop takes D5, bishop C4, bishop F7, and queen B3 is interesting, right? So this is a possible line of play also. All right, but Radoslaw went for more dynamic opportunity in the position, and he decided to take on the doubled pawns, right? Open the line for his rook, so he doesn't have to waste any time developing his rook there. And also he has the bishop pair to compensate for his deficient pawn structure, so to speak. And he has a preponderance in the center, right? So again, equal chances for both sides. E takes D5, bishop takes D5, and now A4, and now F5. Again, this is a type of position that a player like Giri likes. Okay, it's an equal position, has some imbalances. Okay, and this type of position favors the player who is just simply more at home. And if I had to say who was more comfortable in this position, I would have to say it was Giri. Right, he has a good pawn structure, no real weakness, and he has some targets to exploit. B5 from Giri, and now the battle is over the E5 square. Neither player wants to give up that square, so Wojtaszek plays E4. Giri takes, Wojtaszek takes, bishop takes F3, B takes C6, and now bishop D5 check, and now C takes D5. Again, if queen takes D5, you can see that would be a terrible blunder, as the bishop on E7 would fall. So he has to accept another isolated pawn in the position. And now this isn't too bad because white has a similar pawn structure. All right. The only real difference here is the placement of the pieces. Okay. And this is one thing that I want to bring to your attention, is that in symmetrical positions, it's very important to gain the initiative, because with everything else being equal, the player who is basically one step ahead or dictating the course of the game to the other player will, in most cases, win that game, or at least have a great chance of winning. All right, so here we see a pretty symmetrical situation, right? Both sides have two isolated pawns, pair of rooks, and minor piece, except black has the better minor piece in that he has this dark square bishop that has nice diagonals to go on. All right, and white has a knight. His knight isn't bad, but it's just the bishop is probably preferable in this type of position, because at least the knight has possibility of outpost on D4 and even B5 at some point, and sometimes, hey, even E5 might be a possibility down the road. All right, if we compare the rooks, White's rook on e1 is already fantastically placed on the open file, but black's rook on a8 is putting pressure on the a4 pawn. So it's really about who can gain an initiative first. And so this is what we're going to see in the next few moves. So knight f3, bishop f6, right, putting pressure on the pawns. And now we can see rook e6. So white, or Giri, is the first to penetrate into the black position. Now king h8. Now it's understandable to want to get off of that light square diagonal, but again, have to fight for the initiative here. So more aggressive would be a move like rook h5, a5, excuse me, with the idea of trying to pick up that a pawn, or at least put more pressure on it. Idea here is to play queen d7, right, attacking the rook on e6 and the pawn on a4. So for instance, knight d4, queen d7, rook takes b6, rook takes a4, and you have a fight. Knight takes f5. Notice I've highlighted here because the rook on a4 is only protected by the queen, and this is what allows the tactic knight takes f5 by white. If the black queen rather were to capture on f5, then the rook on a4 would drop. So bishop g5, attacking the rook on c1, knight e3, rook e4. Notice the line of attack from g5 to c1 on the rook, and this is why queen d3 would be played here. If queen d5, right, getting greedy, grabbing the pawn, that would be a great blunder because of queen takes d5, knight takes d5, and then the rook would drop. So in this particular line, you see queen d3, bishop takes e3, queen f5, rook b7, queen e6, and this is just a sample line that I wanted to give you just to show you that if black fights for the initiative, all right, then you can see some back and forth play. And although you see white is up a pawn here, at least black has some play and pressure in the position, all right? He's not just playing in the passive sense. Instead of rook a5, Wojtaszek opted for the more passive move, king h8, queen b3. So you can see Giri amping up the pressure, especially on the b6 pawn. Queen d7, rook takes b6, rook takes a4, and notice white is always a step ahead, and that's what the initiative is about. So yes, black is capturing material, but now you can see Giri right on the attack again after rook d1, attacking the d pawn. Rook a8, that pawn falls, rook d5, and now queen c7. And now Giri makes a little luft for the king, g3, and then queen takes c3. And this is a practical decision from Wojtaszek, avoiding complications. After all, he's probably figuring, pawns are symmetrical on each side, and I'll just simply go into this endgame. Another option is, again, more dynamic option, more uncompromising option is bishop takes c3, rook b7, queen c6, knight g5. Of course, there's a horrible threat here, knight f7. And just to give you an example, look something like that, and you can see there's trouble on the horizon here. So of course, not to allow that, h6, rook b6, queen c8, and knight e6. Okay, and the game, again, very complicated still, and but it does give the players black more chances as far as to try to create something, but at the same time you're allowing white opportunities to attack also. So queen c3, this move is indicative of the playing style more than anything. Some players, maybe a player like Kasparov might have played bishop takes c3. Queens come off the board, bishop takes c3, and it looks like, maybe draw is imminent. King G8. Again, sort of passive, and maybe the King H8 move wasn't necessary, as we shown earlier. Again, with these symmetrical positions, initiative is very important. Look at where White's rooks are. So one rook is already on the 7th rank. Rook A D8, trying to trade off. Rook C5, again, initiative, attacking, forcing black to move. Rook C8, Rook D5. Of course, Giri doesn't want to trade. And now Rook C D8 again. And Rook D B5. So this avoids the trades and keeps some pressure on the position. Rook D6. If G6 here, Knight G5 be a little uncomfortable. Rook D6. And now Rook C7. And these highlights that I've placed here represent just a defensive posture for black that black could assume in this position and probably be okay. It's not 100% guaranteed, but the idea is to play a move like G6, Bishop G7, a la Dutch defense, and then perhaps Rook D to F6. Bishop A1, keeping the eye on the G7 square, of course. King G2, Rook A6, H5, and Giri just pushes little by little, squeezing in the position. Rook A2, and now Rook D5. And this, of course, creates opportunities for the knight. Of course, maybe Knight to E5 at some point, Knight to D4. All right, but Giri has other plans. Of course, attacking F5. So now Rook A6 and Knight H4, and you can see now there's attack on the F5 pawn, G6, and H6. And this is bad for black, having that pawn there on H6, because you always have to worry about getting mated or some type of combination occurring. I've been in these positions before where that pawn is just sitting there on H6 for 10, 15 moves, and it seems it always comes back to bite you at some point. F4 from Wojtaszek, G4 from Giri, and just simply F3 here. This is like a trappy move from Wojtaszek, right? He's under pressure. This just shows you that how dangerous the position is, since White's pieces are swarming all over the place. So for instance, if he does a natural looking move like Rook AF6 here, then Rook G7, King H8, and Rook DD7, and black is in all type of hot water. So he plays F3. Now if Knight takes F3, then Rook A4, and this will give black some counterplay here. Of course, Giri, in that style of Karpov and Capablanca, he doesn't like to play like that. He doesn't like wild positions where the opponent has all type of counterplay. So after F3, he just scooches the king over the G3, and so now Wojtaszek has to come up with something else. He plays Rook B6. Again, another idea is Bishop F6, but then G5 comes. And then Rook D6 is a slick tactical move. And the idea behind that is to exploit the fact that the white king is on G3. All right. And black possesses a dark squared bishop. So the rook on D6 is not really sacrificing itself, because after rook takes D6, then just simply Bishop E5 check, picking up the rook. And this is why after Rook D6, White will go back and play K5, Bishop E2, Bishop E7, Rook B6. And you can see there that black, although worse, still has some play in the position. Instead of that move, Rook B6 was chosen. Rook C D7. And of course, Giri has to be careful. If he just does a natural move like Rook D D7, then Bishop E5 check, just like we were speaking about in the previous variation. So instead, Giri plays rook c d7, rook b3, and now g5 is setting up the finish here. All right. Wojtaszek does not spot it, and he plays bishop b2. Giri played rook takes h7, and the game was over, and he was forced to resign here. The reason why Wojtaszek resigns is because after rook takes h7, the main line will go king takes h7, rook d7, king g8, h7 check, and then when the king moves into the corner, the knight mates on g6. All right. Wojtaszek could have avoided that idea by keeping an eye on the knight. That's one of the ways. So for instance, rook b4, keeping the eye on the h4 knight. So now if rook takes h7, then just simply rook takes h4, and that's going to lead to a draw. And actually there's a cool stalemate here. So rook g7 check, bishop takes g7, h takes g7, let's say rook f4, right? Threatening mate in short order. Rook d8, king takes g7, rook g8, and king takes g8. And that would be a nice little stalemate there. So that's one way to prevent the combination that took place on the boards, is by playing rook b4. The other way is by playing the move rook f7, obviously blocking the h7 pawn from attack. But white still will be ahead here after rook takes, king takes, rook d7, knight takes f3 here, bishop b2, and you can see black is still behind, but at least white has a lot of work to do. So the game will still, be going on at this point. But instead, Wojtaszek missed this idea, or at least misevaluated the idea, and rook takes h7 happened, and he was forced to resign. So another win, second win in a row from Anish Giri. I hope you enjoyed that video. Please like and subscribe, and click all the buttons that you're supposed to click down there below. I look forward to hearing your comments on the content. Also, check the links below. There's a donation link. Please support my channel if you're able to do so. It will be greatly appreciated. And also, look at the other links. There's all type of DVDs and books. If you're interested, just click on those links. And I usually try to put material down there that's related to whatever opening that we saw on the board today. So London system, I'll try to put some things related to that. Also, I want to let everybody know that Chess Audiobooks is also on chess.com. So if you want to play a game, just hit me up there, and on Live Chess, same name, Chess Audiobooks. Also on Twitter, Chess Audiobooks, and also on Instagram, Chess Audiobooks. So please follow me on all of those social media apps, and I'll be seeing you guys shortly on the next video. And once again, thank you for joining me for this video presentation. I'll see you guys later.